Hello, and welcome to Part 2 of Kentucky TextSet's third module, Helping Students Access Complex Texts. I'm Dr. Angie Gunter, and I'm really excited to share this section of the professional learning because it contains practical advice. And what teacher doesn't love resources and strategies that can be readily incorporated into the classroom? In Part 1 of this module, we discussed how purposeful grouping and sequencing of print and non-print materials can build student readiness to tackle complex texts. The reality is, however, that even with text bundling and careful sequencing, students often need support when presented with a complex text. We want to promote productive struggle rather than destructive struggle. The experience of frustration in students can be caused by a perceived lack of support or a feeling of unreadiness. So we want to make sure that students feel they are ready for and equipped to engage in a text that will be challenging. If we let kids in on the fact that what they are about to read is very rich and it has lots of layers and several levels of meaning and it's going to require multiple reads to really understand it, they will be less likely to just look at it and immediately give up on it. To make this work practical for you, it would be helpful if you would have in mind a text that meets these requirements. Consider a text that you use or that you would like to use that presents challenges for your students, and throughout this session, think about how you might use these strategies discussed with this particular text. One of the most useful tools in addressing the unique needs in complex text is this one, developed by Student Achievement Partners. The document is in the Dig Deeper section, and it's called Supports for All Students in Accessing Complex Text Using the Qualitative Measures Rubric Indicators. That's a long title, I know, but when we dig into it, I think that you'll appreciate it as much as I do. If you'll recall, we introduced the qualitative measures rubrics for literary and informational writing in Module 2 of this series. The beauty of this supports document is that it recommends strategies that correspond to each of these indicators on the qualitative rubrics. So, if you anticipate that students will struggle with the structures of the text, there are strategies that specifically address structural challenges. If students are likely to get tripped up with the language or word usage in the text, strategies to address vocabulary deficits are listed in the language features section. If the purpose of the text is complicated and will likely be the most challenging factor, there are ideas of ways to help students in that area. And finally, if it is likely that students will not have adequate background or contextual knowledge to grasp the details of the text, recommendations are listed to help build those gaps in knowledge. So, once you've identified which one of these aspects of the text will likely pose the biggest challenge for students, you can evaluate the suggestions for support in that section and decide which one or ones will be the most helpful for your students. Let's stop here and think back to that challenging text that you're considering while viewing this module. Pause the webcast here, and in the Think section, type your response to question 1 regarding your potential text or texts and which of these 4 categories will likely present the biggest challenges for your students. When you finish with your response, continue this webcast. Let's consider our Vernal Pool text we used in Module 1. We identified that language features might present a challenge. We noted the inclusion of content-specific vocabulary that could be unfamiliar to students, and we saw figurative, idiomatic language and allusion to Lord of the Rings. Using the qualitative measures rubric, we'd probably not rate that text as exceedingly complex, but it would fit in the category of very complex, say for a 5th grade reading group. So since we've identified language features to be an area of challenge, we could then consult the language demands section of the supports document. Each section is set up in descending order of hands-on during the reading involvement of the instructor. The blue arrow indicates those levels of support as they decrease. So it may be that at the beginning of the year you would need to read aloud to students, but as their skill level grows, you could move down the list with less hands-on supports, such as providing them with a list of challenging words with their definitions and having them work through the text on their own or in small groups. I see these recommendations as excellent strategies for differentiation to support the unique needs in our classrooms, not necessarily just for whole group applications. For example, in my room with 30 students, say, I may have some who are previewing a list I've created of challenging vocabulary by creating some gestures, I'd call that charades, in their small group before reading the text. Others might be digging into the text or just portions of that text and selecting difficult words or words they aren't sure that they know the meanings of, and I might ask them to find pictures they think represent what the word means in context. I might cut out a list of challenging words and direct another group to place the words into categories, asking them what connections they can make with the words, how they might go together. Certainly, it can be effective for a teacher to read a complex text aloud to students, particularly if discussion time or journal jotting is built into the read aloud. Allowing students to create mental images as they follow along and to share their thoughts with their classmates not only aids in developing their understanding of that text, but it can also create a sense of community in which they value learning from and with each other. So a next step for, or even an alternative to, a teacher read aloud is a paired reading strategy utilizing pre-highlighted text. As you can see, these are identical texts. I would pair a stronger reader with one who is less strong, give them the identical text, and then ask them to read the article aloud in order, assigning one to read all the yellow lines and one to read all the blue lines as they occur. Scan the highlighted text and consider which reader would likely be assigned the yellow text and which one would be assigned the blue text. Pause the webcast now and enter your response in question 2 in the Think section. When you've finished your explanation, continue this webcast. The highlighting requires students to alternate reading and listening to the text and is designed to allow the stronger reader to model prosody and pronounce difficult words aloud before the below-level reader encounters those words. Those readers can hear a pronunciation before they have to read them aloud, helping build their skill and confidence in the safety of just pairs rather than that whole group setting. When considering strategies for pre-teaching challenging words students will encounter in a text, engagement of their brains and bodies is very important. An enlightening and fun activity to introduce vocabulary to students is called tabletop Twitter. The first step is to chunk a text into small portions and then tape those chunks onto poster papers around the room. Students form groups of 3 around each poster and read their paragraph chunk together. As they read, they are to select 3 words they don't know or are not sure they fully understand in the context of the paragraph, and they write those words on their poster. The next step is to post the directions for students, the rounds they'll be participating in. Explain that for each round, their group will have only 1 minute, 20 seconds to complete the task. And that's the connection to Twitter. Twitter used to have that 120 character limit. You will need to place a dictionary or thesaurus beside each poster or allow students to carry their iPhones or iPads or laptops with them. When you post the directions, they will already have completed round 1, so direct students to move to the next poster, moving in a clockwise direction, and when you start the timer, they will have 1 minute 20 seconds to complete the directions for round 2. So they will write definitions for the 3 words the previous group had listed on their poster. After 1 minute 20 seconds, students must stop writing, no matter how much they've completed, and move to the next poster. In round 3, they write 3 synonyms for each of the words on their poster. You'll notice that the rounds include non-linguistic representations, and in round 6 they work with each other to attach actions or motions to each word. Let's stop and consider the benefits of tabletop Twitter activity. Please pause this webcast and type your response to question 3. When you've finished your response, continue the webcast. Tabletop Twitter puts Marzano's 6-step process for teaching vocabulary into action, quite literally. Often, in dense writing, words will repeat in the different chunks of text, allowing students to encounter the words at various stations. You might choose to post the same paragraph on each poster to ensure this recursive exposure will occur, Or you might choose to select the words for the students prior to the rounds. It's an engaging and fast-paced activity allowing for movement and collaboration, built around real learning of words that students will encounter when they dig into that complex text. Another engaging group strategy is an interactive word wall. Students preview content-specific and challenging vocabulary words from a complex text. You will print those words on individual cards, and you could put them in small groups of students, directing them to try to create a semantic mapping of the words. You would direct students to connect the words using arrows and describe their rationales for the connections as they place them on the wall. As students discuss the connections and the grouping of the words, they learn from each other and they build their understandings of the words through collaboration with their peers. It's an effective, formative assessment as well. As you circulate around the room, you will be able to see the words that students are struggling with or that they might have misconceptions about, or they're not defining it within the context in which you know that they'll be using in the assigned reading. You can use this activity to target unknown vocabulary more effectively. So once you've identified the words students will need further help with, you can then format the challenging text to help students make sense of it. If you'll remember in Module 1, we discussed the importance of not taking away words from the students who need them the most. If there are words that will essentially act as roadblocks for students, hindering their understanding of the content, we would call out those words by highlighting them and adding the in-context definitions, allowing students to progress through the text. With so much technology at our fingertips, we could also just easily reformat the text to add photos and graphics that will add further understanding directly beside or under the words. Assistive technology can give students that ability to modify their own texts, giving them the autonomy to meet their very individualized needs. For example, the Google extension Read and Write will not only pronounce words or read entire documents out loud to students, it will provide students with definitions and add pictures of words they highlight, taking away the need for me to anticipate which words my students might not know. Another tech tool that aids students in navigating the vocabulary in complex texts is Rewordify. Text can be copied and pasted into the site, and it will display a rewordified version of that text, providing user-friendly definitions for challenging vocabulary words. Although other sites allow teachers to select lower vocabulary versions of text for lower readers, which would essentially result in a similar reading experience, the benefit of using Rewordify is that the challenging words are not removed. Students can click on the definition and see the word it is replacing. Again, this is a move toward providing equity for students and not depriving them of words. These are just some of the scaffolding strategies in just one section of this document. Now do you see why this might be a first go-to when considering ways to help students access these complex texts? On the Supports for Struggling Readers page on the Kentucky TextEd site, I've been working to add hyperlinks to each of the recommendations in each of the indicator categories to further illustrate how these activities could work. Check back frequently because this is an ongoing process, and as I learn of new strategies, I will keep adding them. This concludes Module 3's direct presentation portion. To conclude the session, visit the Supports for Struggling Readers page on the Kentucky TextEd site. The link is listed in Resource 1 in the Dig Deeper section. Choose one section, either text structure, language features, purpose, or knowledge demands, and read the recommendations. Was there a recommendation that you would like to use in your classroom? And if so, which one? And do you have any other suggestions that you would add to the list? Address these questions in your final reflection in the discussion section, and remember to add your email address to receive your certification. You will be ready to progress to Module 4, Locating Appropriately Complex Texts. Thanks, and happy reading!